And we are back with episode 15 of One If by Land, Two If by Tea, the history comedy podcast, where a real-life history teacher teaches an art school student everything he should, or in this case, shouldn't learn in history class. I am the Eddie McCabe, joined as always by my host, Sherpa, in person, trying to make me not say the wrong things, Mr. Clark. Mr. Clark, how are you doing?
I'm doing great. We're in rhythm,
yeah.
You know? And the whole point of that podcast and this continuation of it is, make up your own mind.
Sure.
But I want people to understand what this thing is that's flying around the news, where it came from, and then you can decide to, where you stand.
And that's thing
fine.
is this is our second part discussion on critical race theory, mostly taking a look at what exactly it is.
What is it? And of course, our opinions, we can't hold them in. We're both opinionated, but we're going to try to clearly differentiate when we are saying specifically what they believe and our opinions on it.
Sure.
We'll try to stay fact-based. I'm going to refer to James Lindsay and Helen Pluckrow's cynical theories, which really is just a history of all of this.
Sure.
In incredible detail, some of which goes over my head.
Yeah.
As you heard in the last episode, the last topic, I was like, I'm not really sure the difference between positionality and intersectional theory.
Yeah.
And that's where we let off, and we were discussing guilt.
Yes.
Guilt for non-believing.
Yes.
With religion.
Yeah.
But there's also a tenet of critical race theory that deals with that.
So just to kind of catch you back up,
Yep.
Because I believe these will be released a week apart, I brought up at the end of our last discussion that if I was to grow up believing in a Eastern religion, Taoism, Hinduism, or something like that, but come to find out Christianity is real, at what point is that to be held against me when ultimately the tenet of being a good person is still active and the most important part?
Yeah, and I'm going to paraphrase here because at this point you brought me right to it. And this is Delgado and Stefancic. So their argument is that racism is ordinary, not aberrational. We in America traditionally, right, we like to believe that racism is not the norm, that it's a rare occurrence, right? Yeah. It's on the margins, okay? And the critical race theorists argue against that. They say it's normal, everyday experience for people of color. And they say that a system of white over color ascendancy serves important purposes, both psychic and material, for the dominant group. So white supremacy is systemic and benefits white people. Colorblind policies only tackle the most severe problems,
right,
but not everything else. So critical race theory is against the concept of colorblindness.
Yeah.
That right there might be the most controversial part of it.
Yeah, so that doesn't make sense to me, right? Because at that...
I think you're allowed to have that opinion.
That doesn't make sense to me because that contradicts what I think and I believe we are trying to achieve, right? So the idea of treating everybody the same is, and like working towards that goal is, I thought, what we were all trying to work towards, right? I'm not even necessarily telling you that some things are not accurate. I mean, you see it all the time in those like studies where it's just like, we put out the same resume and one had a more traditionally African-American name and one had more traditionally white name. And the person who was white got called back more often than the person that was perceived to be black.
A staggering number.
Like, look, here's the thing. I'm not telling you that that doesn't exist, right? You know what might help is if we just take race off of the job applications altogether, because that's one of those things where it's like you're trying to do good, but in itself actually just allow the system to be manipulated in a negative way by people that will manipulate the system in a negative way.
Yeah.
Right? So that's the way I look at that sort of thing. Like, I'm saying that exists, but being like, yeah, colorblind policies just don't work. And it's just like, well, then what the hell are we doing?
Policy and philosophy,
right,
and outlook.
Right.
So they would say that if you are saying that you're colorblind, you are ignoring race and racism, that you are not trying to disrupt it, you're not attacking it.
Yeah. The thing is that we all laugh, and I go back to the LGBTQ alphabet mafia example. We all laugh at the companies that during Pride Month release their Pride merch, right? Because you don't care the other 11 months of the year. It is a marketing tool that you're using to be like, look at me, I care, and I help. One of the biggest ones is whenever there's a rainbow Chick-fil-A logo. And look.
Wait, did they?
I think that I don't know if it was like somebody else made it and just like released it online. Because I don't remember where I saw it, but I remember seeing it and had a good chuckle for myself. But the point is that it's like you're not actually tackling any of the problems because you only care about this issue 1 month out of the year, right? And it's the same thing where it's just like, if you're telling me that we shouldn't do any of this stuff because it doesn't help, you're not helping.
Exactly. And I feel like we were raised to believe in colorblindness.
Right.
Right. That's how we were raised. And all of our friends and, all of our friends are loving, kind,
right,
open people who hate the idea of racism and it existing in this country. So that's where we stand on that.
I know. Hot take.
But it is.
It is.
So it's important to acknowledge that critical race theory is against that.
Yeah.
And why I believe schools in Florida and Texas are banning it is because they believe in the traditional civil rights colorblindness ideals, whether they've been achieved or not. Right.
It's a completely separate argument.
Yes.
You're 100% right. I think that looking at the tough part is that also what level are you talking about teaching this, right? Because I do feel like there is a level of that in this, even, when you're talking about critical theories in general.
Yeah.
Right? Because the one that I agree with wholeheartedly is the body mass index, like that fat critical theory is that
fat studies.
Yeah. Like fat studies is like, yeah, there are so many things like women's bodies, right? You talk about marketing and it's hard to describe an image to you over a podcast, but I'm going to do my best. So when you look at jeans, right?
Yes.
Or weight loss, right? Weight loss ads. Look at a picture of a woman who is mildly considered to be overweight, and then the before and the after pictures. If you look at the before pictures, looks like a normal person. If you look at the after pictures, you can tell it in the crotch. Don't be weird. But this was brought up in a marketing class. It's the only reason I know. There is a part of that woman's body, 9 times out of 10, that is actually cropped out. It is not like, it looks like the type of person that rides horses for a living. You know how I mean? Like they're like bow-legged because they've spent all their time on horses, and it's unnatural and it's weird looking. And it's because they want to sell you the weight loss thing because they told you that you, even as a woman who might not necessarily be super overweight, is unhealthy and need this drug.
I'm going to sidestep this discussion.
Yeah. Oh, I absolutely hate it. We can't even, I'm not even going to talk about.
It's a whole nother, we could do fat studies.
I would like to. I have very strong opinions on it.
Yeah.
And like
it's a whole nother chapter, whole nother podcast.
The male perspective and stuff. And I do believe that for a lot of it is based on fashion and weight.
So speaking of perspective, right? So we talked about it with positionality, intersectionality. The critical race theorists believe that there is a unique voice of color, right? And that minority status brings with it a presumed competence to speak about race and racism. So essentially, right, there's some of that that's like kind of obvious, right? Like you don't, if you don't experience it, you don't know about it. Where you could get tricky, right, is the universal, unquestioned belief of any one person.
Sure.
Right?
Sure.
Bill Burr has that joke about the believe women quote,
Yeah.
where he's like, all of them?
All of them? Yeah.
Right. So obviously that tenet of standpoint theory and like you experience racism,
right.
you have the voice to understand that. Obviously we agree with that.
Yes. Yeah, because that's the thing is like it's weird because you're taught growing up that you're a unique snowflake.
Yes.
Right? And that's the thing is that you're a unique snowflake and your experiences in life are different and special to you.
Mm-hmm.
And this spits in the face of that when you're telling me that, oh, it doesn't matter, you're a monster.
Yeah. I'm going to read a quick summary from Lindsay and Pluckrose just of where we are now, especially since we're at a two-parter. These core tenets unambiguously assert what is going on in critical race theory. Racism is present everywhere and always, and persistently works against people of color who are aware of this and for the benefit of white people who tend not to be, as is their privilege. Other theorists and educators include a fundamental distrust of liberalism, a rejection of meritocracy, and a commitment to working towards social justice. So that's where we stand.
Yeah.
How we've gotten to where we're at now.
Yeah, and it's like that's tough, and this is where the nuance comes in, right? Because we just talked about the application thing.
Yes.
Right? And that's a real thing.
Real, statistical, measurable.
That's a real statistical, measurable thing. And it's like, look, it's really tough. It's really tough and a tough place because, yeah, more Caucasian people should be aware of that kind of thing. And I think that my boss has done a good job, right? He doesn't go about beating his chest. He doesn't go about beating his chest about look at me, look at me, look at me. I'm making the changes. I'm a good white guy, right? He just makes the changes. And if you look at the organization that I am a part of, right, there are high-ranking members of our organization that are African American, gay, and Latino, right? And at no point was this like I'm going to make sweeping changes and be the savior of my industry. Like, at no point did he ever do that. He just put the best people in charge that fit in those roles that were those people, right? Because a big thing, and we're going to go real inside baseball here. Improv comedy is predominantly what we like to call a medium-sized brown-haired white guy activity. Right? And the thing is that you can just accept that by putting out a casting notice saying, hey, we're holding improv troupe auditions. Come to this, a function hall at a hotel, and we're going to have an improv audition. And brown-haired, medium-sized white guys are going to show up because that's who does improv, right? But that doesn't mean that there are not funny women, Asians, gay people, black people, you know what I mean? Like, one of the best things that I saw last month, right? I watch a lot of comedy. I go to a lot of comedy, part of the gig, was a Portuguese specific improv show. And they were 3 Portuguese actors, 2 men and a woman, that did their whole routine around Portuguese improv. It was a Portuguese improv show, right? So they exist. Are you, as an organization, going to put in the effort to find them?
So the critical race theorists argue that any discrepancy in the outcome is determined by racism.
Yeah, and that's the problem and like this is where they lose me, right? Because ultimately I would like to think that we're all working towards the same goal, right? We're all working towards the same goal of like, look, these systems are all kind of jacked up and we need to fix them because not everybody is on a level playing field, right? And we need to fix them. But what you're telling me is, at least this is part of what I'm hearing, and I could be wrong, but this is what I'm hearing based off of these quotes, is that it's like, look, I think that we should go about it this way. And you're like, no, you're racist because you're trying to help.
Yeah, and yes, we'll get to Robin DiAngelo later.
Yeah.
Who has, made her fame off of saying things like that. But also that instead of like fixing these systems,
right,
we need to tear it up and start over.
Right.
That's a very popular idea in critical race theory. And go back to the previous episode if you don't believe me. I read some quotes.
And here's the thing. That, much like communism, which we had talked about last episode, in theory, should work. Yeah, okay. You're 100% right. Let's just rip
do it over. We're smarter now than we were in 1787.
Yeah, sure. You're 100% right. The problem is that the milk is already spilled, right? The milk's already spilled, and we don't live in a test tube.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, we don't live in a lab where we can just scrap this one and start the experiment over again.
Exactly.
You know what I mean? Like, that's the problem. That's a problem with one of these, like, theories when they're so radical, right? Is that it's like, man, you're telling me that everything is on fire.
Yes.
And instead of just like, let's put out the fire, you're like, no, let's burn it, let it burn, and we're just going to plant a new garden.
Yes. I also, my personal leaning is broken systems hurt everybody.
Yes.
But they might disproportionately hurt ethnic minorities, people of color, whatever term you like to use. So fix the broken system for everybody.
Right. I go to, like, even the education system.
We're going to get there in 10 seconds. So say it. Say it.
Even in the education system, like, it's not even necessarily a race thing, but it feels like there is a desirables and undesirables when it comes to the education system. I was in the undesirables. When it comes to, and we've talked about this, not on the podcast.
Yeah.
But we've talked about this before. Again, I'm from the very affluent suburb of Boston in Newton, Massachusetts. And I went to a high school in which there was multiple tracks in the high school, right? There was the honors level.
Yeah.
There was the basically what they called Curriculum 1, which was the normal people level. And then there was Curriculum 2. And basically what the difference between 2 and 1, which is what I'll focus on, I think everybody understands what honors is.
Yeah.
Or advanced placement, it was another name for it, is that you basically got a slower curriculum.
Yeah.
Based on like, IEPs or like, special education of stuff like that. But the idea is that you go at a slower pace because you can't handle the regular pace. When in reality, all it was that there were kids that didn't fit the cookie cutter model of what like a student should be, where Newton, Massachusetts specifically, I can't speak to anybody else because I didn't go anywhere else, but they basically wanted to prepare you for the tests that made them have their evaluations, right? I am being taught to take the MCAS, which tells the state how well the school does. And you're not actually caring about whether or not I'm learning. You're caring about whether or not I can take this test.
So critical race theory actually does, which the next point I was going to talk about is it spreads from legal studies to education, like schools of education.
Right.
The schools that teach the teachers are teaching critical race theory, and everything from school discipline, tracking, like you brought up, high stakes testing, curriculum, bilingual education is influenced at the college level by critical race theory.
Okay.
It's interesting you bring up the Curriculum 1, Curriculum 2 thing because at Waltham High School, we have the same thing, except they call it C1 and C2.
Yeah, sure.
Right.
Sure.
Well, they got rid of C2. They merged the two of them.
Okay.
And what they were saying, now I don't know whether they were inspired by critical race theory, full-on critical race theory fans, or they made a decision that the critical race theorists would support and cheer on.
Right.
So they looked at the situation and they said that people of color are being referred to C2 at a disproportionate rate.
Right.
Right. So if I were a critical race theorist, I would say that it's due to racism, that you're just pushing these kids to the lower track.
Yes.
Racism. Right. Not looking at any other factors possible. Right. So what Waltham did is they said, we're going to merge C1 and C2. And they celebrated like we have just solved all the racial problems that will ever exist. It is done. We did it.
Yeah, sure.
Patted and I'm sitting there looking at it like, well, if these students were not scoring well on these tests, and you moved them from one room to another,
you didn't
and did nothing else. Then you will just have students that are struggling in the new C1.
Yeah.
Like that's all you've done is move it instead of look at, well, why are these students in this class? What is the reason? Like, are they not getting enough of this or that? Is it, actually they're formerly ESL students. So like that language process is taking a little longer and that's why they're in C2. I'm not saying what the answer is because I don't know.
Right.
I'm fairly new to the community.
It's also a more complicated. It's a more complicated answer than we're going to solve on our podcast.
That's my opinion. That it is a complicated and multi-factored problem.
Right, but you're 100% right. Is that you didn't change anything?
Yeah.
You just
moved them. Yes.
And then thumped your chest like you did something.
They really did.
Yeah.
If any of them are listening, they're going to be very mad that.
But no,
they were very happy. They were very proud. I don't want to rain on their parade.
No,
but we need to focus on making sure that those kiddos learn.
Right, but that's the type of thing where it's just like it's easier to just ship those kids aside than it is to actually teach them. Mm-hmm. Some kids don't want to learn.
Yes.
Right? Like that's a thing. Like I won't fault you on that. There were kids that I was in school with that were in my classes that were extremely disruptive to the point of pulling knives on each other. Right? And like that kid is always going to be a headache, right? And that's always going to be disruptive to anybody that's actually trying to learn. But yeah, maybe someone like me who needs more motivation to be invested doesn't actually need to be in that type of class or environment. You're being lazy at that point, right? And I feel like it's the same thing because in Newton, right, we were a part of what was called the Metco program, right? And what they would do is, and this is, when you actually say it out loud, sounds terrible. But it's basically like a lottery-based system for inner-city African Americans that would be basically picked up in the morning and bussed into our high school where they were, or not just our high school, but all of the schools, elementary, middle, and high school. And then they would just go through the Newton education system. But they were from Dorchester, Mattapan, like inner city like neighborhoods. And it's like, instead of actually like, just dealing like with those kids who some of them were extremely bright and did, very well for themselves, but it's just like, you just shove these kids in these undesirable classes because, they come from these areas, they have to be disproportionate and like, from these like test standpoints.
Yeah, that was a real problem in the MECO program.
Right.
For sure. And, we, in the Clark household, we have stories for days. My wife went through the program.
That's right.
Yeah. Yeah. My mother-in-law was one of the first.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. She was one of the first when the program was created.
Oddly enough, I think my dad was too.
No, he moved.
Yeah, but they moved because of the program.
Because of busing.
Oh, yeah. That was it. That was it.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was the busing.
Yeah. We talked because I substitute taught at the school that he fled.
That's right. He
Yeah.
fled that. Oh, what a weird, wild thing. That should be another show.
Oh, for sure. That's where I got my white gloves. Was
Bussing.
Boston Bussing master's thesis. Yeah.
Yeah.
So back to the core ideas of critical race theory, right? Gender and race are socially constructed, right? So we talked about that before, how that's biologically true. Everybody agrees on that. That's common sense, right? But
Sure.
the difference that critical race theorists have is that there has to be a focus and an emphasis on your identity in order to get rid of oppression. That we're not gonna get rid of racism without talking about it extensively.
Sure.
So there's some pluses and minuses to that, obviously. But we'll get to the next idea in critical race theory, that white supremacy is embedded in our culture.
Okay.
There's no escaping it, and that we're indoctrinated into white supremacy growing up in America, and that basically it's impossible for white people not to be racist.
Right.
They are also the only ones who can be racist because they hold the power.
Right. And so, like, again, this is the type of thing where nuance comes into the discussion, right? Because, again, I go back to the applications. Real, tangible data, right? Real, tangible.
Yeah. Disturbing.
Right. Very disturbing. The problem is that, 90% of people are just trying to get through their day.
Yes.
You know what I mean? And sure, could I be nicer to people? I guess. But at the same point, I have to wake up. I have to worry about my father, who's in and out of the hospital with cancer and a myriad of other issues. You know what I mean? I have to work a job that is multifaceted with a ton of moving parts, with people I have to coordinate with. I do shows like this, and that's before I have to worry about watering and feeding myself. You know what I mean? And so it's like, oh, I have to make enough money to make sure that I can live in the apartment that I rent. And so before I can even worry about another person, I have to do all of these other things. And again, in a lab and without extenuating factors, sure, I guess you're right. We should take a look at these systems, but I don't have time to do that.
Okay, you brought me to a great point that we need to address, right? Is the idea of complicity.
Right.
So they argue that all white people in the United States of America are complicit in racism.
Right.
Differing scholars will say that being an anti-racist gets you out. Some will say that gets you out of it. Some say there's no getting out of your complicity in racism.
Right, and that's the problem. And I guess that's my biggest issue with all of it, is that if you're telling me that I'm, through no fault of my own, terrible and racist because I just exist, then you can't, I'm trying to figure out the best way to phrase this. You can't tell me that without having a negative reaction, right? If you showed up to any event, right? We're going out to see a play, right? Mm-hmm. And I look at you when you walk up to me and you're wearing a brand new suit.
Yeah.
Wow, you look like an idiot in that suit, right? You've done nothing but put on this suit, right? But now you're going to be mad at me for telling you that you look like an idiot in this suit. Mm-hmm. Now, the next time that we go out to a formal occasion, you're going to look for a reason to do the same thing to me, right? You're going to be negative on purpose to me. And that's the problem. That's the problem with this sort of ideology. Because if you're telling anybody, oh, well, you're a white person, so you're racist no matter what you do. Oh, well, if that's what you think I am, then I'm going to not care.
I'm deeply concerned about that.
You know what I mean? Like, and I'm not saying that this is me personally, but I'm just saying, like,
Yeah.
this is how, like, incels get formulated, right? And
Involuntary celibates, in case people don't know.
involuntary celibates. Yeah. They blame women. They blame women for them not having any sort of sexual relationship. That's basically what that is for those of you who don't know. But the idea is that in their mind, they've concocted this story that all women hate them, so I'm going to just hate all women. That's the story. And with something like this, with this type of ideology, you run that risk, especially because and again, this is where the nuance comes in. There are evil white supremacists.
Yes.
There are things like the Proud Boys, right? Like, I forget what the patch says, but the patch just says they didn't murder enough Jews in the Holocaust. Like, that's something that they just wear. Like, you know what I mean? And so those are evil, evil people that their goal is to be supreme over all other races.
Yes.
And the problem with something like this is that when you start to beat into somebody's head that you're lesser than, right? With this particular type of ideology, somebody like these white supremacy groups, that's how they recruit people.
Yeah.
You're going to cause a bigger problem if you were to allow these groups to now come in and be like, yeah, the world hates you, huh? Well, you know who doesn't? I don't. So we should all hate the black people together. You know what I mean? Like, that's what's going to happen because those people are evil. Those people are nefarious. They have ill intentions. They are the problem. And you're opening the door to confused people.
I'm really glad you brought up intention.
Yeah.
Because that's another core tenet of critical race theory, that intention doesn't matter.
Right.
So, yeah, we've been traditionally brought up that, like, racism is treating somebody badly of a different race than you. They argue that whether you're intending or not, you're complicit in a system that, oppresses people of color. And that the status quo is comfortable. The idea of comfort comes up a lot in these texts.
Yeah.
That the status quo is comfortable, so anything that's uncomfortable is making things better.
Right. And the problem with something like that and a statement like that, at least in my mind, is that so Colin Kaepernick, right? Colin Kaepernick took a knee at NFL football games. Mm-hmm. People lost their mind. It was a whole thing. And the thing that nobody asked him, right? And I never got the answer for, is because he was kneeling because of police brutality. That was the reason he was kneeling at the national anthem. Nobody ever asked him, okay, Colin, what needs to happen for you to stand for the national anthem again?
Excellent point.
Right? You're just kneeling for this thing that might never be solved because you're not ever offering a solution. And that's the same type of thing that I keep hearing with these types of quotes, right? Is, okay, so every single system is constructed as a racist, white supremacist, like, system. Okay, let's just say, for argument's sake, that I'm agreeing with you. What do we need to do? Like, in your mind, like, what do we need to do to make it so that these systems are on equal playing field, that are no longer oppressive? Like, what is, because the answer can't be like, well, I don't know, we just gotta, like, work to be better or something.
The answer would be multifaceted. It would be look for, call out, and confront racism everywhere.
Sure.
Change your discourse.
Right.
Yield positions of power to marginalized peoples, previously marginalized peoples.
Okay. So far, only one of those three is not a idea.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, hey, okay, so we need, because, like, maybe not necessarily the idea of, like, yielding. Like, I'm not going to all of a sudden just
Well, I found that very funny when that was popping up in I can say this because he's no longer my principal. My principal, former principal, was putting that in that like being anti-racist means yielding positions of power to marginalized groups, and I thought it was really funny because it was like you're in the position.
Yeah,
of
you're the power.
Technically, that means you have to leave,
right?
or you have to like give more power to those marginalized, and he never did.
Yeah, of course he didn't. Yeah, of course he didn't.
Enjoying retirement.
But that's the thing is like, the idea of, because again, what does that look like?
Exactly.
The CEO stepping down and appointing a marginalized person, and again, I don't know anything about the corporate structure of Coca-Cola, but let's just, you know what I mean? Like, I'll let you know, like, Jeff Bezos is not going to, well, I guess he did, but he's not going to, I'll go back to Coca-Cola. The CEO of Coca-Cola is not going to step down to all of a sudden appoint a minority person to now be the CEO, right?
Well, see, we brought this up before, sort of tangentially, like it came up in a bunch of quotes, but critical race theory doesn't believe in meritocracy.
Sure.
They don't believe that people are winning this tournament to get the position based on their skills and competence.
Yeah.
Now, obviously, pure meritocracy is rare and hard to find, and there is some nuance there. But most of these people in these positions, they have some talent, they have some skill. There's a reason that they're there.
Right. 100%. But it's just like, but like in the purest sentence or sentiment of that statement, you're saying that the CEO of Coca-Cola should resign.
Yes.
And appoint a minority person to run Coca-Cola.
Yes.
And it's like, look, that's not going to happen because, again,
humans don't work like that.
One, humans just don't work like that.
Yeah.
And two, that is a classroom study version of this, not a real world study of this, right? But now if you're telling me that the CEO of Coca-Cola trying to find the COO and is just like, look, I'm going to go out of my way to find a minority candidate that is qualified for the position, well, now we're talking, right?
The Rooney Rule in the NFL.
Right.
It actually worked, immediately, because people brought in people that they might not have otherwise.
Right.
And there was some cynicism when the Rooney Rule was passed. Like, this isn't going to, they'll interview somebody to go through the motions, and then that'll be that, and then you have Mike Tomlin.
Right.
And
who is one of the longest tenured head coaches. He might be the longest tenured head coach outside of Bill Belichick.
Yeah. And there were a bunch of others that I'm forgetting now, and NFL coaches get hired and fired all the time. But it was really successful, and it worked. So, like, how can we find more things like that don't, right? Because I believe in meritocracy.
Sure.
I will say it. So, how do we find the best person and make sure that the talent rises to the top regardless of your, your skin color, all the other factors that shouldn't matter.
Right. And again, it's the idea of, like, sometimes you create more of a problem by segmenting.
Yeah. And so we're sort of coming to the end of the core tenets of critical race theory. I want to talk about Robin DiAngelo.
Okay.
Have you heard of Robin DiAngelo?
I have not heard of Robin DiAngelo.
She's probably the most famous critical race theorist out there as far as like mainstreaming the ideas.
Sure.
She wrote a book called White Fragility.
Okay.
And the thesis is essentially that white people, it's similar critical race theory ideas, right? That you're like complicit in racism, inherently racist. The only way out, it's not exactly a way out, is to constantly seek out racism, confront it, challenge it.
Right.
And her argument is also that if you try to deny being racist, that is a sign that you are racist.
Sure.
That denial, anger, frustration are all signs of racism, resistance to her ideas. And she has made a ton of money doing corporate training.
Yeah, of course.
Going around company to company. Her book has been a bestseller for a really long time. There have been like teacher book groups reading it at various schools that I've worked at. So like this is pretty like widespread.
Sure.
And I gathered some quotes.
Okay.
Just a little sprinkle of Robin DiAngelo. The ideas that are out there now, right? Where are we now?
Sure.
Where are we now?
Sure.
With what are the ideas that are being exchanged in and around schools? Because that's what I care about selfishly. So here's one. It is white people's responsibility to be less fragile. People of color don't need to twist themselves into knots trying to navigate us as painlessly as possible.
Okay. So
I hate being called fragile.
So here's
I have to say it.
Yeah, well, here's the thing. And again, it's the idea of that defensive nature, right? You see it a lot in corporate culture when you're talking about like the idea of ideas, right? Mm-hmm. When you're talking about the idea of the concept of ideas, it's a scary thing to put out an idea. And if somebody is sharpshooting your idea, you're not going to go to them anymore, right? Because you know that you're going to get a negative response from that person. The way that I always talk about it is when I went to film school, I always used to nitpick the shit out of people's homework, right? Mm-hmm. Because basically what we would do is we would get some sort of assignment, film this type of scene, right? Just like, two people walking down the street, let's just say. And we would have a list of criteria that we would have to accomplish. And I would never go first. I would always try to go as close to the end as possible. And what I was trying to do was I was going to nitpick everything that I saw that was wrong in everybody's thing that went before me. And I did it because I knew that if I nitpicked everybody else's ideas, they would get mad. And they would then look at mine and be as critical as possible of my work. And I did it because I wanted people to be as critical of my work as possible so I could get better. It's
wow,
insane.
That's impressive.
It's insane, but like that was the thing, because I know that if I tell you that your thing isn't wonderful and awesome, you're going to get defensive and you're going to get mad. That is human nature.
Yeah.
It is 100% human nature. So if I get you defensive and mad, you're going to want to get back at me. It goes back to the suit and calling you stupid earlier, right? And so the same thing is to be said about this sort of thing. If you keep telling a race of people that you are racist, then you're going to just make people mad.
Let me give you another one.
Oh, okay, because I have more to that.
Oh, yeah. I believe that white progressives cause the most daily damage to people of color. I define a white progressive as any white person who thinks he or she is not racist or less racist or in the choir or already gets it. White progressives can be the most difficult for people of color because to the degree that we think we've arrived, we will put our energy into making sure that others see us as having arrived. None of our energy will go into what we need to be doing for the rest of our lives, engaging in ongoing self-awareness, continuing education, relationship building, and actual anti-racist practice. White progressives do indeed uphold and perpetuate racism, but our defensiveness and certitude make it virtually impossible to explain to us how we do so.
So now this is the question that I would have, right? And you can't answer this.
Probably
you
not.
can't answer this question, but so you're going to, so this person makes this statement in their book.
Yes.
Now, that is their opinion.
Yes.
Right? That is just 100% their opinion. What makes their opinion more valid than somebody that would then take the opposite opinion and be like, because what's the stereotype? The stereotype is that African Americans are lazy, right? Like that's the thing. So what is stopping that statement from being true if your statement is true? You know what I mean? Like if you are saying that all white people, no matter what, are racist, what makes that opinion more valid than somebody that might have the opposite opinion?
Okay, so to be clear, you're saying if we can stereotype one group,
yes,
why
Right.
Right. Then,
Why?
like, what's to stop people from stereotyping other groups?
Correct.
Want to make that very clear.
Yes,
Yeah.
that is yes. If I said it weird, then but that's the
Yeah. So that's a great question.
You know what I mean?
And I've never thought of that, and I've never seen her confronted with that question. But she's sort of Jedi mind tricked you, right? Because if you argue with her, that's a sign of racism. So like you're only like if you're in that room with her,
right.
Like
Well,
you're like left. You're just like, what do I do? I'm going to shut up.
Well, so that's the thing is that it's the Ben Shapiro model. It's the Ben Shapiro model of debate, right?
No, he just fast talks you.
Yeah, he does fast talk you. But it's that idea. So it all goes back to that social media thing that we talked about in the first the first part of this, right? I need to quote unquote be on the right side of history. Mm-hmm. And racism bad is not a hard stance to be on, right? Like that's the problem. The problem is that at its core, and if you just, it's kind of like the Black Lives Matter versus the BLM organization. Mm-hmm. It's kind of like that same sort of thing, right? Yeah. Like believing in the idea that like Black Lives Matter and that we should like, not murder them in the street by the police is not a hard stance to be a part of.
Yes.
But when you look at the like people that hold the internet like handles of the BLM organization, it is more of an extreme movement than you would think.
Yes.
And so it's that same sort of thing, right? Where it's like, yeah, it's real easy to wave the pom-poms of like, yeah, let's not be racist.
Well, so I think that's why these ideas have exploded in the last year, right? Is that so many people, I don't know how they weren't paying attention, but the George Floyd video was just so shocking to them.
Yeah.
To me, it was like, have you heard of Amadou Diallo? Have you heard of Trayvon Martin? Have you heard of...
There is no Trayvon Martin video.
Right.
That's the thing.
Yeah.
Is that there is a, like, Trayvon Martin is exponentially worse.
Yeah.
Exponentially worse. The problem is that there isn't a 9-minute video of watching this man die. Yeah. There's not a 9-minute snuff film of this. You know what I mean? And that's why...
I don't know if they're equal. Trayvon Martin and George, I mean, they're both murders, right? I mean, how do you differentiate? I don't want to rank order them.
Yeah, that's fine. Yeah. They're both murders. Yeah. They're both really sad. They both shouldn't have died.
Yeah, they both should be alive today.
But the point is still the same.
Yeah.
Is that one happened and we heard about it.
Yeah.
And then one we watched.
Yeah, and so a lot of people were shocked and horrified by that, and they were looking for any way to eradicate racism, which is a noble goal.
Right.
And they're like, well, we'll go to the experts. And these people are the experts.
I think that Breonna Taylor has a huge amount to do with it.
Oh my God.
So, she had an internet movement up until that point, right? The cops bust into a house that they shouldn't have been in, kill a woman that was sleeping in her own bed.
Yes.
Right? And all of the police kept their jobs, right? And one
was charged with a minor crime.
Okay, yeah. I think it was like discharging a weapon improperly or something, but it was something, a slap on the wrist / nothing. So this is my stance on this, right? If I work at a job and I do my job incorrectly, now whether or not I get arrested for it is a completely different conversation, but I should not be allowed to work at that job anymore, right? If I'm a bartender, right, and I get mad at a customer and I take a beer and I throw the beer at the person, right? Shouldn't be a bartender anymore.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. It's over very quickly.
But that's the thing. And so I am a police officer, and whether I'm supposed to be there, not supposed to be there, I shot and I killed somebody that was sleeping in their bed. Not a threat. Not like I'm definitely not supposed to shoot that person.
Yes.
So whether I'm arrested for murder or not, separate conversation. But I should no longer be allowed to be a police officer anymore. You know what I mean? And but that gained a lot of steam in the internet community, that like, hey, all this bad stuff is happening and these people are still like walking free. They still are the cops. They're still this, you know what I mean? And so that internet tension boiled over until we got the 9-minute video of George Floyd.
Yeah. So, and the response, right? Like, let's look at the response in the lens of critical race theory is the police as a system are inherently racist and oppressive, and we need to defund.
Yeah.
And
I also think that defund is such a stupid term, right? It's kind of like when we talked about like, and I mean,
it's a bad idea.
It's a bad idea.
It's a bad idea.
But the idea of like, you know, global warming was the original name for the climate change. That was poorly named, right? That was poorly named because when it's like cold in like July, and it's just like cold one day and they're like, oh, global warming, huh? And it's just like you feed into stupid people saying stupid things because you mislabeled it, right?
Well, I disagree. I think that defund the police means exactly what they say it means.
So it's tough because there's two schools of thought, because there are the like crazy extreme people that are like, we shouldn't have police officers anymore, and it's just like, no.
Yeah.
That's wrong. That's wrong, because you're asking for way more trouble than it's worth. But reforming the system, and I believe Boston is putting this into practice, where their nonviolent crimes, they're sending different types of people. So like, yeah, we're just going to send an EMT to this medical emergency as opposed to this police officer with a gun to somebody that might be having a mental breakdown.
All of that. So, yeah, well, I guess my point, right, is that like, you know, defund the police is essentially of like, on the far end, it's like get rid of them or minimize them or whatever. But like, I do not think you get a better service if you put less money into it.
Yes, correct. No, you have never in the history of anything paid less and gotten more.
Right. So the conversation that I would have loved to have had in the wake of Breonna Taylor is when do we have a no-knock raid?
Right.
When do we have a no-knock raid? Should we have a no-knock raid for possible drugs?
Right.
No.
Right?
So, you know, the actual logistical things that will literally save lives. Like if we stop crashing down doors in the middle of the night to maybe or maybe not find drugs,
right,
you don't have an accident with guns. That
100%.
Right.
Well, and again, it all comes back to that same idea of like, we're not having the actual conversation that we should be having around police reform.
That's how I feel. And so that's my
big
personal opinion with critical race theories. I think it steers us away from the conversations we should be having.
Right. And I 100% agree with, because sure, some of these systems are disproportionately affecting minorities, right? I would agree with that. I talked about it on the last podcast. I don't think I mentioned it in here, but it's like marijuana is legal in Massachusetts. I can go tomorrow and pick up a pound of weed. I don't know if there's limits on it, but like I can pick up as much weed as I want, because I know at the very least they don't have any systems in place that I can't go to all of the marijuana places to pick up drugs.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
But you can come back the next day.
I can go 5 days a week and buy stuff. I don't think that there's any systems in place. I could be wrong. I don't go every day. But the point is that there are people sitting in prison in Massachusetts that are on marijuana possession charges, and they should be released yesterday.
Yeah.
Right? Like, that system is disproportionately affecting those people, and by extension, disproportionately affecting minorities.
Yes.
So that type of stuff we need to look at 100%. But we are we're trying to have a pizza party for a company that desperately needs you to like give everybody a vacation.
Yeah, it to me it makes racism too much of this mystical, mysterious boogeyman thing that's hiding in every corner. When there are real things we could do tomorrow, that would lessen the impact of the criminal justice system on the African American community. Like cash bail.
Sure.
Should not exist in the United States of America.
Nope.
It is a violation of
something.
14th Amendment, at least equal protection under the law.
Right. You're 100% right.
Because if I am accused of a crime and I have the money,
I can out.
I can go home, right?
Yes.
And I can meet with my lawyers as much as I want. I can prepare my defense in one way. If I'm being held on a bail that I can't meet,
right,
then I'm very limited in mounting my defense. Right now, obviously, there's some details. The devil's in the details, right? Because there are people who are a danger to the public who just need to be held, and it's complicated. But
I think
2021.
Right.
We can do better than we're doing right now.
100%. The other thing too, and I talk about talking about systems that create more problems than they solve, right? So college used to be far more affordable. And the problem is that even at quote unquote more affordable, it was disproportionately affecting minorities because they weren't able to get loans.
Yep.
They weren't able to get loans to go to college.
Or pay the tuition outright.
Right? Because like you talk about how, and it's, it's a contentious argument amongst millennials and boomers basically about like how expensive college is.
Yeah.
And now, so they put in place that basically you have to give anybody a student loan.
Yeah.
Right? Like that's basically what the thing is. So now instead what has happened, instead of just allowing everybody to get the loan at a couple of $1,000s to pay for the school, you're talking about hundreds of thousands of dollars. And now you've just created the problem 10 times worse because you allowed these schools to now just charge whatever the hell they want for these same classes, and everybody's footing the bill. I went to a for-profit college, right? And here's the thing. This is 100%, affecting minorities.
Yeah.
Like 1,000%. So this was the scam. The government does not like my school. I don't even know if they're a school anymore. The one that I went to doesn't exist anymore. It closed. It is one of the art institutes, and they're all over the country. And basically what they are is they're an art school, and they specialize in like video production, graphic design, video game design, music, like all sorts of stuff. And so what I'm going to talk about is specifically the music major. All right? There are a lot of people that came into this school because they would accept literally anybody, and they would saddle you with a bunch of debt because they would sign you up for all the loans so that they could get paid because they wanted to attract people that wanted to be like music producers, like rap music producers. Because if you came to the school, you had the ability to use the studio, and like the studio space was like really good, high-end stuff. But they're trying to get as many of those kids in as possible that have not no right, but like that should not be there, right? They are unqualified to be there because it's not the music stuff. I bet they were fantastic at the music stuff. It's the having to go to history class, having to go to English and math and all of the things that make it an accredited degree that they had no interest in. And so they all flunk out.
Yeah.
But now they're still saddled with $100,000 loans.
Yeah.
Because the Art Institute got their money.
Yep.
They got their money, and now you're stuck with the bill. And like that's the type of shit that needs to be examined.
Right. Yeah. And Elizabeth Warren's made that argument that forgiving student debt would close the racial wealth gap in the country for that reason, that it's my argument is usually the broken systems are hurting everybody.
Right.
Usually. And so we should fix them. We should make America a better place.
Yeah, well, and so to kind of validate that argument a little bit, I went through the whole thing, I graduated, right? But now because that organization was predatory on predominantly minorities, right? I don't know if my bachelor's degree counts anymore. You know what I mean? Like, like that is a real thing that I don't know.
Yeah.
Because The school no longer exists. It's
Right.
not a thing. If I wanted to apply and like, look, here's the thing. I work in video production. I've worked for the same company for 12 years. I'm fucking good. But if I wanted to go to a master's program in video or film, I can't get my transcript because the school doesn't exist.
Oh, man.
I can't get my transcript, so I have no idea if that part of it counts, right? So I can't apply, and I don't know if it's accredited anymore now that it's closed. It was accredited when I got it,
Yeah.
but does it now not mean anything?
Oh, man.
You know what I mean? And so it's like, that's a problem because you were predatory on minorities and it affects everybody.
Yeah. Yeah. And I hope, through these last 2 podcasts, we at least covered the bases of like, what does this actually mean? So that people know when it's being debated, when it's being talked about, like, what is the thing?
Right.
And what do they stand for? So you don't want to say you stand for something if you don't know what it means.
Yeah, right. I also think that this is kind of like what we talked about in the prior Islam episodes, right? Is that taking a look at these sort of things in like an actual like historical context is very interesting and very positive, right? And so what I would suggest is that this sort of discussion is too hard and too nuanced for, I don't know what it's called, like I guess like K through 12, right? Like this is the type of discussion that I think like fully functioning adults need to have because there is a nuanced life experience at that point. Like a college course, I think is where we could start to introduce something like this. And just because I don't think that people are developed enough.
My solution is focus on the accuracy of teaching your history.
Oh, that's the other thing too. And I wholeheartedly agree with that, where it's like, yeah, let's have a real discussion, right? Just pinpointing the problem in sharpshooting issues,
Cherry picking
the
worst examples
doesn't help, right?
Or the best examples,
right?
On the
Either
other
way,
side does not help.
Either way, if we spill a gallon of milk and we all just start pointing fingers at like, well, if you did this, we wouldn't have spilled the milk, and you should have done that, and we didn't spill the milk, nobody's cleaned up the milk, right? And so it's the same thing where it's like, how about we accurately teach history? Because it's like, yeah, look, there's some good and there's some bad when it comes to the founding of the United States. And we need to have that conversation. We also need to have a conversation that most of the people that are upset with this lived in the era where there was the most propaganda.
Well, Florida, for example, right, has outright banned critical race theory.
Sure.
Like, their ban is like no critical race theory.
Yeah.
In their history standards, slavery is in the standards. The Jim Crow is in the standards.
Right.
The Indian Removal Act is in the standards.
See?
The Trail of Tears is in the standards. Martin Luther King, Malcolm X, Ida B. Wells, all in the so this idea that like banning I'm not saying banning critical race theory is necessarily.
Well, again, what is it?
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
Like
people don't know what it is.
That's the thing is like, show me what the critical race theory is. Like, what is that curriculum?
Right.
Because if I tell you, hey, we're going to talk about Malcolm X, right? And you go all the way back to our first episode.
Yeah.
Right? And we talk about this is what we're going to cover. You could tangentially produce a document that says for this hour, this is what we're talking about.
Yeah.
And in detail, I know you have the notes. I haven't seen them, but I know that you have them. You know what I mean? Like, this is where we're talking about. This is where the information comes from and all of this other stuff. With something like this, you're talking about an abstract concept.
Well, that's why Texas's law is you are not allowed to teach that one race is superior to another.
Yeah.
You are not allowed to teach that one race is inherently oppressive. You are not allowed to assign guilt or responsibility to people for things that their ancestors did, which sounds so common sense. But the way that we're at today, it's like that's a controversial, like I wasn't alive for
Yeah.
most of these things.
Well, and it's also like, it's such a weird thing. Like, it's such a weird concept because you're talking. So I can trace back, right, in my family tree, 3 generations ago, we weren't here.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And so, like, it's easy to say that, like, my ancestors had nothing to do with slavery, but they really didn't.
Yeah.
Right? Because my great-grandmother on my mother's side, on, one side, was from Ireland. She moved here from Ireland. And I can basically easy cherry pick all, 8 grandparents or great-grandparents at that point. Like, I want to say 1 to 2 of them were not from, we're from here.
Yeah.
But if we go back another generation, they weren't. You know what I mean? And so it's like, that's such a weird broad brush to paint without knowing people's situations.
Yeah, and I don't understand how it works for biracial or multiracial people.
Right.
I don't. I mean, they talk about intersectionality. I mean, and just personally, right?
Right.
I'm in an interracial marriage, so
Yes.
I'm going to have biracial kids someday.
Right.
And I just wonder how they would be taught in this system about their identity.
Right. Well, and again, you're not solving anything. That's my biggest takeaway from this is, like, I don't have a problem with bringing up the topics, talking about it and discussing it, because if we stick our head in the sands like an ostrich, then we're never going to get anywhere, right? I talk about this with, like, global warming with, like, my dad, right? My dad is just like, well, China, and it's just like, look, here's the thing, man. If you're going to just pull out the abstract concepts of these other countries and these things, it's like, well, then we should just not try.
Yeah.
Right? Because you're not even willing to come to the table
Right.
at the discussion. And that's kind of where we're at here. So we have to come to the table, but basically coming to the table and being like, there's nothing you can do about it.
There has to be honest and open discussion, which is the part that I have beef with, because a lot of these, right, with the Robin DiAngelo
Sure.
Jedi mind trick, if you disagree with her, that's a sign of your racism.
Right.
So it's like, we can't have an open discussion if we're not like why are your ideas not up for debate,
criticism,
questioning, discussion?
Right.
Right. That's where I'm at, is like, we need to be able to talk about these things without, like, if you're not in the orthodoxy, you're immediately just out, just 100% binary. You're in or you're out.
Yeah. And again, like, this exists in a more nuanced space, and it's tough because, like I said, I think ultimately we'll find the water level, because I go back to what we started, in the last episode where we talked about the, gay rights and LGBTQ alphabet mafia sort of stuff. In the beginning, people lost their mind that we were going to be talking about this.
Yeah.
And at the end of the day, they didn't turn all of the kids gay in the way that, like, not that that's a bad thing, but it's like they didn't, like, indoctrinate kids into this alphabet mafia the way that they thought that it was going to happen, And so I would like to see the water find its level with this, because, again, I go back to those real examples that we've given throughout these 2 episodes. The applications and people sitting in prison for crimes that they shouldn't be, right?
Yeah.
Not because they didn't commit them, but because the laws have changed and now it disproportionately affects them.
Yeah, and I am a believer in incremental progress.
Sure.
Which the critical race theorists are against. So I think we should just go out and pick something and make it better.
Right. The problem with that is just like, okay, you don't believe it. You believe in broad sweeping change. What do we do? You know what I mean? Like, that's the problem. And that's the problem with all of the, like, and again, I don't want to use, like, stupid talking points, but it's like when they get criticized for being the woke, right? And it's just like, yeah, well, you kind of deserve some of that criticism because your idea is like, yeah, we're going to start a utopia and it's going to be like no more billionaires. And like, it's just like, whoa, hold on. Yeah, all of the things you're saying are right or at least have some merit.
Yeah, there's a kernel of truth in a lot of this. And we hopefully we were fair enough when we were talking about critical race theory.
Well, because again,
that we think they have a valid point.
Right. I do think that there are things that we do need to look at with like, okay, you're right. That's a systemic racism thing is the application thing. That is a systemic thing. How do we address that, though?
I don't know if that's systemic. Or is that implicit bias, which is another area that they're focused on.
Sure. And I guess, but like that's an area that we need to look at.
Yeah.
Right? Because the thing is like you're not going to change anything unless you look at them. But not like math isn't racist. You know what I mean? Like,
should we do colonial theory?
Yeah. Yeah. No, but you know what I mean? Like that's the type of thing where it's just like there are things that just don't have that attached to them. Like now if you like again, if you want to say that people not being good at math, that's a teaching thing and we can go into the education system and we'll talk about that when we talk about busing.
Yeah, we will. You know what I mean? Where I got my white gloves episode will happen in the future.
But it's like that's the type of thing that I think like it's a much more nuanced discussion and like if you need to produce a curriculum for me if you want to do this because again, having a critical look at Malcolm X, the way we talked about him in our first episode, very informative. I don't think we pulled any punches. And if that's the type of education that you're going to be getting on a larger scale at a high school level, then wonderful.
Yeah.
Great. That is a critical look at history. But just being like, yeah, if you're white, it doesn't matter. You're just systemically racist.
Yeah.
And it's just like, well, that's not solving the problem.
Yeah.
That is creating more of a problem than you think. Because again, you have to, that sword cuts both ways.
Yeah.
Right? Because now you're making an enemy, not a companion.
Right. I think the bell rang.
Yeah.
Long ago.
You know what? We're only 12.
It was great.
We're only 12 minutes over.
Oh, okay, great.
Yeah, so
Great.
it was pretty good. So thank you very much for tuning into this two-parter. That was a spontaneous two-parter. Very exciting.
Yeah.
So any final closing remarks before we get on out of here?
Hopefully, like I said, hopefully a better understanding of just what it is. And
Yeah.
if you agree with us, that's fine. If you don't, that's fine too.
Yeah, I would open it up to having a logical, and rational discussion. I mean, all of these platforms, wherever you're listening on it, has some sort of comment section. Leave your comments, thoughts, questions, concerns. Maybe we'll address them, in a podcast or like a dedicated episode if that's something people want. But thank you very much for tuning in. It means a whole lot. Please like, comment, share, subscribe, tell your friends, tell your neighbors. Every little bit goes a long way. Thank you very much, and we'll see you in the next one.
Thanks, everybody.